In a valley carved between mountains that wore the colors of every season, there was a village known for its stillness, a kind of peaceful hush that seemed to wrap around the hearts of those who lived there. It was the kind of place where birds sang with the sunrise, and children ran barefoot through golden fields without a care in the world. Among them lived a man named Liam. To the people of the village, Liam was a quiet blessing. He was kind, thoughtful, always ready to help anyone in need. If a wheelbarrow broke, Liam was the first to fix it. If someone fell ill, he brought herbs, soup, and a comforting smile. He was the kind of man people trusted, admired, and often relied upon. But Liam carried a secret ache. Despite his good deeds, despite the warmth he offered others, there was a space within him that often felt empty. It wasn't because of anything missing on the outside. His home was simple but cozy, his neighbors were friendly, and he had his health. No, the emptiness came from within. Some mornings he'd wake with energy and hope, only for the weight of something unseen to settle in his chest by noon. Other days, he'd feel joyful, only to have that joy dissolve into quiet sadness without warning. He didn't understand it, he couldn't explain it, and worst of all, he felt guilty for it. How can someone who has so much feel so little inside? He would ask himself. So he smiled a little wider to hide the sadness. He worked a little harder to keep the thoughts at bay, and each night, under the old elm tree on the hill just outside the village, he'd sit alone and stare at the horizon, watching the sun disappear, wondering if his emptiness ever would. Then one morning, something unusual happened. A traveler had arrived. Word spread that an old sage had come down from the northern mountains. He wore robes that smelled of cedar and smoke, and his eyes were said to see more than most could hide. He didn't speak much, but those who sat with him left changed, lighter, calmer, as if he'd reminded them of something they'd forgotten. Liam didn't think much of it at first, but that night, when the ache in his chest returned like a familiar ghost, he felt something stir in him, a whisper, maybe hope. The next morning, he made his way to the clearing where the sage was said to stay. The man sat beneath a flowering tree, legs crossed, hands resting in his lap. He looked as if he belonged to the earth itself, weathered, grounded, quietly glowing. Liam approached and sat down. No greetings, no pleasantries, just truth. "I don't understand," he said softly. "I live simply, I help others. I do my best to be good, and yet I feel empty. Some days I'm fine, some days I'm not. It comes and goes like a storm I can't predict." The sage didn't answer right away. He simply looked at Liam with eyes that didn't judge, eyes that had seen sadness before. Finally, the old man smiled. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something, but to see it, you must look with more than your eyes." Liam nodded and stood. He didn't know why, but in that moment, it felt like the ache in his chest had shifted. Not gone, but listening. Like it, too, was curious about what the sage would reveal. And just like that, their journey began, not away from sadness, but towards something deeper, something healing, something true. The sun was still low in the sky as Liam followed the sage through the winding forest path, the morning air crisp with dew and pine. Neither of them spoke. There was a quiet understanding between them, like something sacred was unfolding. With each step, Liam felt both nervous and curious, as if something important waited for him just beyond the next bend. After a while, they reached a hill just outside the village. The climb was gentle, but Liam noticed how steadily the sage moved, like he was drawn by something familiar at the top. As they crested the hill, Liam's breath caught. There, in the center of a wide open field, stood a tree unlike any Liam had ever seen. Its trunk was massive, thick with age, and its roots spilled out like veins across the earth. Its branches reached out in every direction, as if trying to embrace the entire sky. The leaves danced in the breeze, whispering a language only the earth and wind understood. There was something about the tree, its presence, its stillness, that made Liam feel both small and safe. The sage stood beside him, gazing at the tree with reverence. "This tree," he said finally, "has been standing for more than 100 years. It's seen droughts, storms, lightning, and snow, but still it stands." Liam nodded slowly. "It's beautiful. It's resilient," the sage corrected gently. "It's strong not because the world has been kind to it, but because its roots run deep." Liam looked at the thick roots curling into the earth. They were rugged and knotted, yet they held the entire tree with a kind of quiet power. "People often look at the surface of things," the sage continued. "They admire the branches, the shade, the fruit, but none of it would exist without the roots, hidden, humble, unseen. It is the same with people." He turned to Liam, eyes filled with warmth. "Sadness, fear, loss, they are storms. You can't stop them from coming. But if your roots are deep, rooted in self-awareness, gratitude, understanding, you will not fall." Liam's gaze softened as he listened. The words felt like water soaking into dry soil. "So, you're saying the sadness will still come?" The sage nodded. "Yes, and that's not a bad thing. Rain feeds the roots. The goal is not to eliminate sadness, but to learn from it, to grow through it. The tree doesn't stop growing just because the sun hides behind clouds." Liam looked back at the tree and suddenly saw more than just branches and bark. He saw years of survival, seasons of change, proof that strength isn't about avoiding struggle, it's about learning how to bend without breaking. "But how do I grow those roots?" he asked softly. The sage smiled, as if he had been waiting for that question. "By knowing yourself, by embracing your pain instead of hiding from it, by asking, 'What is this sadness trying to show me?' and then listening with your heart." He stepped closer to the tree and placed his hand gently against the trunk. "You grow roots every time you stay with your discomfort instead of running from it, every time you speak your truth, even when it trembles, every time you let yourself feel instead of pretending to be fine." A breeze swept through the field, rustling the leaves in a soft, affirming hush. Liam closed his eyes and placed his hand on the tree too. For the first time, he didn't try to push away the sadness inside him. He simply stood with it, the way the tree stood with storms. And in that quiet moment, beneath the branches that had seen 100 years of weather, Liam felt something he hadn't in a long time. He felt rooted. As dusk settled over the village like a soft blanket, Liam returned home from the hilltop with a different kind of silence in his heart. It wasn't the heavy emptiness he had grown used to. It was quiet, but alert, as though something within him had woken up, stretching slowly after years of slumber. That evening, as the sky turned to embers, the sage arrived at Liam's door. He carried a small wooden box, no larger than a loaf of bread, worn with time but handled with care. "This," the sage said gently, placing it in Liam's hands, "is for the next part of your journey." Liam opened the box. Inside was a single wax candle, off-white and plain, with a small packet of matches beside it. The sage's eyes were calm and clear. "Take this candle into the darkest room in your home. Light it, and stay. No matter what you see or feel, remain until you understand." No further explanation, no clues, just that. Liam nodded, not because he understood, but because he trusted. That night, once the village had gone still and the stars emerged above, Liam descended into the old storage cellar beneath his cottage. It was the darkest place he knew, a space untouched for years. The air was stale, and cobwebs clung to the corners. He set the candle down in the center of the stone floor and struck a match. A soft flame flickered to life, casting a warm glow around the room. At first, it felt peaceful. The candlelight danced against the walls like a gentle heartbeat. But as Liam sat and waited, something strange began to happen. The shadows started to shift. They twisted along the walls, stretching longer than they should. Shapes emerged, tall, jagged, some moving with unnatural grace. Liam's heart began to race. The cellar, which had felt safe in its stillness, now pulsed with discomfort. His first instinct was to leave, blow out the candle, escape the room, but he remembered the sage's words, "Stay." So he did. He stayed through the unease, through the rising fear. He stayed as the shadows grew thicker, whispering fears he thought he had buried long ago. "You're not enough. No one really sees you. This sadness will never end." The shadows weren't just shapes. They were voices, old wounds, doubts, regrets, echoes from places deep inside him. His throat tightened, his hands shook, but still, he stayed. Then, amidst the chaos of shifting darkness, Liam noticed something. The flame of the candle, small, steady, never flickered. Not once. The shadows danced, screamed, stretched across the room, but the light did not falter. And suddenly, Liam understood. The shadows were his, born from fears, shaped by sadness, animated by his own mind. But the candle, that gentle light, that was also him, the part of him that never left, the quiet strength, the steady presence that had waited patiently beneath every storm. Tears welled in his eyes, not from fear, but from recognition. He wasn't broken, he wasn't weak, he had simply forgotten where to look. When morning came, Liam emerged from the cellar with the candle still glowing faintly in his hand. The world outside was unchanged, but something inside him was not the same. He went straight to the sage, who waited under the same tree. "I saw them," Liam whispered. "All the things I was afraid of. They tried to scare me." "And what did you do?" the sage asked. "I stayed," Liam said, "and I found light." The sage smiled. "Then you have faced the hardest part, not the darkness itself, but the belief that the darkness defines you." And from that moment on, Liam no longer feared the shadows, because he had found the light within them, and within himself. The days after the candle ritual passed like pages gently turning in a book. Liam was quieter, not in sadness, but in thought. He moved through the village with soft eyes and a softened heart. The ache he once carried like a heavy stone had changed. It was still there, but lighter, less sharp, like something had been acknowledged, not erased. The sage noticed the shift, and, one morning, invited Liam to join him again, this time toward the outskirts of the village, where the mountains kissed the mist and the trees grew wilder. They walked for hours, following a narrow path that disappeared into thick forest. Finally, they stopped before a yawning black entrance carved into the rocky hillside. "This," said the sage, "is the cave of the mind." Liam looked at the entrance. It was wide, deep, and dark, far darker than the cellar had been. It seemed to swallow the light of the day itself. The sage continued, "Everyone has a cave like this. It's not made of stone, it's made of thoughts, feelings, memories. Most people never enter it. They fear what they'll find. But the ones who do, they find what they didn't know they were looking for." Liam swallowed. "And what do you find inside?" The sage smiled. "Yourself." Without another word, the sage handed him a small brass oil lamp. The flame burned steadily, bright but not blinding. "Take this," the sage said. "Go alone, and whatever you find, keep walking. You'll know when to return." Liam took the lamp and stepped into the cave. The light followed him, flickering against rough stone walls. The air grew cold and thick. As he walked deeper, the silence became louder, pressing in on all sides. Whispers echoed, though no one spoke. Then, the darkness came alive. It wasn't the kind that hid things, it was the kind that revealed them. Suddenly, the cave showed him flashes, the faces of people he'd lost, mistakes he had buried, words he regretted saying, and the ones he regretted never saying, his failures, his fears, his moments of loneliness, his helplessness. The lamp flickered, and he clutched it tighter. He wanted to turn back, but he remembered what the sage had said, "Keep walking." So he did. And then, in the deepest part of the cave, where even the air held its breath, he found something unexpected. An old man sat beside a quiet golden flame, just like in the candlelit cellar, but older, calmer. The man didn't speak. He simply looked at Liam with kind, ancient eyes. Liam stood still, unsure. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice like a soft wind through trees. "This place," he said, "is your mind. These shadows, your past, your pain, your fear. But look closer. You made it here because you didn't turn away." Liam looked at the golden flame. It didn't flicker. It pulsed, steady and alive. "Most people fear their own thoughts," the old man continued. "So they distract, numb, avoid. But you chose to feel. You chose to walk through it." The man stood, walked to Liam, and placed a second lamp in his hand. "This flame is yours now. It's your hope. Keep it with you. When sadness visits, when darkness lingers, let this remind you. You are not lost. You are searching, and that is strength." When Liam emerged from the cave, the sky had changed. The sun was lower, casting golden light through the trees, but the world felt different. Brighter, not because the cave had disappeared, but because he now carried a light strong enough to guide himself through it. And from that day on, whenever Liam met someone lost in sorrow, he would not try to fix them. He would simply say, "There is a cave within you, and inside it, a flame. If you have the courage to walk into the dark, I promise, you'll find your light." When Liam returned from the cave of the mind, something had changed, not in his walk, not in his voice, but in his presence. There was a steadiness about him, as if he carried not just light in his hands, but peace in his heart. His eyes, once searching and clouded by questions, now held quiet clarity. Not all his sadness was gone, but it no longer ruled him. He had made peace with the shadows. The villagers noticed. Children ran to him with ease. Elders nodded at him with respect. People sought his advice, not because he had all the answers, but because he listened differently now. He didn't rush to fix pain. He didn't fill silence with words. He simply made space for others, for emotions, for truth. One morning, as Liam sat beneath the ancient elm tree where he had once wept in silence, a young boy named Eli approached. His eyes were red from tears, his shoulders hunched from carrying too much emotion for someone so small. "I feel sad," Eli whispered, "and I don't know why." Liam smiled, not the kind of smile that dismissed the sadness, but the kind that welcomed it. "I used to feel the same," he said softly. "Sometimes I still do." Eli looked up, surprised. "But you're always calm. You're always okay." Liam shook his head gently. "I'm not always okay, Eli. I've just learned to see sadness not as a sign of weakness, but as a visitor. It comes and it goes. And while it's here, I listen to what it wants to teach me." The boy was silent, absorbing the words. Then Liam reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small wooden candle holder with a wick already placed inside. He had made dozens of them in the weeks since returning from the cave, gifting them only to those who were ready. He handed it to Eli. "This isn't just a candle," Liam said. "It's a reminder that even when your world feels dark, even when your thoughts twist into shadows, you still have light, and sometimes the smallest flame is the most powerful thing in the world." Eli clutched the candle tightly, as if he were holding a secret treasure, and in many ways he was. That evening, Liam lit a lantern and placed it on the windowsill of his cottage, then another by the old well, another on the bridge where children played. As the sun set, more villagers joined him, placing lights at their doorsteps, not because he asked, but because they understood what it meant. It became a tradition, simple and sacred. Whenever someone in the village felt lost, someone else would place a light at their door, a silent reminder, "You are not alone in the dark." Liam's home became a place people visited when they needed to breathe. He spoke less of answers and more of courage. He told stories about storms and trees, shadows and caves, and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep walking. And though the sage had long since moved on to another distant village, his words echoed through every part of Liam's life. You are not meant to avoid the darkness. You are meant to carry light through it. Years passed. Liam grew older, but his heart remained young. Children who once cried in his lap came back as adults to thank him. Elders who had feared their own regrets found peace in his presence. And every so often, someone would ask him how he had become so calm, so wise, so rooted. He would smile gently and reply, I stopped waiting for the light to find me and started becoming the light for others.